Hello, dear friend. Welcome to this peaceful evening, to this moment that belongs entirely to you. As the day releases its hold and night spreads its gentle wings, I invite you to join me on a journey, not one of adventure or excitement, but one of profound rest, of settling into the deepest peace. You have traveled far today, carried many burdens, thought many thoughts. Now it is time to set them all down, to let them drift away like leaves on a quiet stream. Tonight, you are safe, you are held, you are exactly where you need to be. Close your eyes now and let yourself settle into this moment. Feel your body sinking deeper into comfort, your breathing naturally slowing. We are about to embark on a gentle journey together to a place where time moves like honey, where the night wraps around you like the softest blanket. Take a deep breath in and slowly let it go. Let us count down together, releasing each worry, each tension. With every number, 10, feel your shoulders dropping, releasing the weight of the day. 9, let your jaw unclench, your tongue rest softly in your mouth. 8, notice how your arms become heavy, sinking into rest. 7, your breathing deepens, naturally, effortlessly. 6, the muscles around your eyes soften, your forehead smooths. 5, your chest rises and falls like gentle waves. 4, your back melts into support, completely held. 3, your legs become wonderfully heavy, completely at peace. 2, your mind begins to float, light as sea foam. 1, you are ready now, ready to drift away to our story. The Mediterranean stretched endlessly before Elias Thorne as he stood on the weathered deck of La Lumière, watching the sun paint its final masterpiece across the darkening sky. The old ship rocked with the gentlest motion, a rhythm so ancient and soothing that it seemed to pulse in harmony with his own heartbeat. This floating sanctuary, anchored in the crystalline waters between Corsica and nowhere at all, had become his refuge from a world that demanded too much, too quickly. The deck beneath his bare feet told stories through its worn planks. Each groove and weathered mark spoke of decades spent battling storms and basking in sunshine, of countless sunsets witnessed and dawns celebrated. The wood felt warm still, holding the last traces of the day's heat like a gentle memory. Elias ran his fingers along the smooth rail, feeling the salt-kissed surface that had been polished by thousands of winds. Countless hands before his. Above him, The rigging whispered secrets in a language older than words. The ropes and lines swayed with hypnotic grace, creating shadows that danced across the deck like living lace. The masts rose toward the deepening sky like ancient sentinels, their silhouettes growing more mysterious as twilight embraced them. Somewhere in the gentle creaking of wood and rope, in the soft percussion of waves against the hull, Elias found the first stirrings of the peace he had been seeking for so long. The air carried the scent of salt and seaweed, mixed with something indefinably sweet, perhaps wild herbs from the distant shore, or the faint perfume of night-blooming flowers carried on the evening breeze. Each breath filled his lungs with this cocktail of oceanic freshness, and with each exhale, he felt another layer of tension dissolve into the gathering dusk. As the last golden light faded from the western horizon, the sea transformed into a mirror of liquid silver, reflecting the first tentative stars. The water moved with such gentle undulation that it seemed more like breathing than waves, the slow, peaceful respiration of some vast, benevolent creature upon whose back they floated in perfect safety. Elias made his way slowly across the deck, his movement unhurried, his footsteps soft on the worn planks. The ship's lanterns had begun to glow with warm, amber light, casting pools of golden illumination that seemed to hold back not darkness, but simply the unknown. These weren't harsh electric bulbs, but old-fashioned oil lamps that flickered and danced, creating a living light that breathed with the evening air. He paused at the bow, where a carved figurehead, a woman with flowing hair and serene expression, gazed eternally forward into the endless blue. Her face, weathered smooth by salt spray and time, wore an expression of such profound peace that looking at her seemed to slow his pulse even further. In her wooden eyes, he glimpsed something like wisdom, the patient knowledge that comes only from witnessing countless sunrises and storms, and learning that both pass in their time. The evening air grew cooler now, carrying with it new scents and sounds. From somewhere far below, the gentle lapping of water against the hull created a rhythm like a lullaby. The sound was neither urgent nor demanding. It simply was, as constant and reassuring as a mother's heartbeat heard from within the womb. Each small wave that kissed the ship's side seemed to whisper, "Rest now, rest now. All is well." Elias descended the narrow wooden stairs to the ship's salon, his hand trailing along the smooth banister, worn glossy by countless journeys up and down. The salon opened before him like a warm embrace. Low-beamed ceilings painted white, walls lined with books that smelled of old paper and sea air, comfortable chairs upholstered in faded but soft fabrics that invited touch. A small table held a ceramic bowl filled with dried lavender, its purple flowers still holding their calming fragrance after who knew how many months at sea. In one corner, an old brass clock ticked with the measured patience of centuries, its sound not intrusive but comforting, marking time the way a cat purrs simply because it can, because all is right with the world. The pendulum swung back and forth, a metronome for meditation, a visual reminder that some things endure, some rhythms persist. No matter how chaotic the world might seem beyond these walls. Elias settled into a well-worn armchair near the porthole, the leather soft with age and countless evenings of quiet contemplation. Through the circular window, the night sea stretched away into infinity, its surface catching and scattering the light from the ship's lanterns like scattered diamonds on dark velvet. The chair embraced him perfectly, molded by time and use into the ideal shape for peaceful reflection. On the small table beside his chair sat a ceramic mug, still warm, with chamomile tea, its steam rising in delicate spirals that caught the lamplight. He hadn't remembered making the tea. Perhaps the ship itself had provided it, one of its many small kindnesses. The first sip brought the taste of honey and herbs, of flowers that had grown in some distant field under Mediterranean sunshine, dried and preserved to bring comfort to evening moments exactly like this one. The warmth of the tea spread through his chest, radiating outward like a small internal sun. With each sip, he felt his breathing deepen, his pulse slow further, his mind begin to release its grip on the 1,000 small worries that had followed him here. The concerns about deadlines and reviews, about the blank pages that had taunted him for months, about whether his words would ever flow again. All of these began to feel as insubstantial as the tea's steam. Lovely to watch, but impossible to grasp. From his chair, Elias could see into the ship's small galley, where copper pots hung from hooks like burnished mirrors, catching and throwing back the lantern light in warm, dancing reflections. The galley window was open to the night air, and through it drifted the sound of water moving against the hull, accompanied now by the distant cry of a night bird, not harsh or startling, but melodic, like a song half remembered from childhood. The ship's motion beneath him was so gentle it barely registered as movement at all. It was more like breathing, the slow rise and fall of a chest in deep sleep. Sometimes he would notice the sensation of being lifted just slightly, held for a moment in perfect suspension, then lowered again with infinite care. It was as if the sea itself were rocking him, the way a parent might rock a child who couldn't quite settle into dreams. He reached for one of the books from the nearby shelf, not to read exactly, but to hold, to feel the weight of stories and thoughts compressed into pages. The book was bound in soft leather, its cover worn smooth by countless hands. opening it, he breathed in the scent of old paper, that distinctive perfume of words waiting patiently to be discovered. The pages felt thick and substantial between his fingers, and though he couldn't quite make out the words in the dim light, it didn't matter. The weight of the book in his hands was enough a tangible reminder that stories exist, that words flow, that tomorrow the blank pages might not seem so impossible after all. The lantern light flickered across the page, creating moving shadows that seemed to suggest words even where none existed. Perhaps this was enough for tonight, not the precise formation of sentences and paragraphs, but the simple presence with the possibility of words, the companionship of all the stories that had been told before, all the stories that would be told again. Through the porthole, he watched a sliver of moon rise above the horizon, its reflection drawing a silver path across the water directly toward the ship. The path seemed to dance and shimmer, breaking apart and reforming with each gentle swell, as if the sea were sending messages written in light. The moon's glow was soft and welcoming, not the harsh brightness of artificial illumination, but the gentle radiance of candlelight made celestial. Time moved differently here, he realized. Minutes could have been hours, or hours, minutes. It no longer mattered. The brass clock continued its patient ticking, but its measure seemed to belong to another world, one where schedules and deadlines held meaning. Here, on this floating island of calm, time flowed like honey, thick and golden and sweet. The tea had cooled now, but it was still pleasant to hold the mug, to feel its warmth seeping into his palms. The ceramic felt substantial and real, grounding him in this moment of perfect peace. Steam no longer rose from the surface, but the faint scent of chamomile lingered, mixing with the salt air and the lavender from the bowl to create an atmosphere of profound tranquility. Elias closed his eyes and listened to the symphony of the night. The water against the hull provided the bass note, deep and constant. The rigging added a gentle percussion as ropes brushed against masts in the evening breeze. From somewhere far above came the soft whisper of wind through the furled sails, and beneath it all, the almost inaudible creak of old wood settling into the embrace of the sea. When he opened his eyes again, he noticed that more stars had appeared, scattered across the darkening sky like seeds sown by generous hands. They reflected in the water around the ship, so that La Lumière seemed to float not on the sea, but in space itself, surrounded by light on all sides. The boundary between water and sky had dissolved in the darkness, leaving only the gentle presence of light, the warm glow from the ship's lanterns, the cool silver of starlight, the soft gold of the moon's reflection. The book still lay open in his lap, its pages now silver in the moonlight, streaming through the porthole. He let his fingers trace the margins, following lines of text he couldn't read, but could feel the slight impression left by type. The whisper of ink on paper. Somewhere in these pages were stories of other nights like this, other souls who had found peace in simple moments, other travelers who had discovered that sometimes the best journey is the one that leads to stillness. A gentle breeze stirred through the salon, carrying new scents from the night, something green and growing from a distant shore. The clean smell of deep water, the faint perfume of flowers that bloomed only in darkness. The air moved across his skin like silk, cool enough to be refreshing, but not so cool as to disturb the profound comfort that had settled over him like a favorite blanket. The ship's cat appeared as if materialized from the shadows, a sleek creature with fur the color of moonlight on water. It regarded Elias with enormous green eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of all seafaring creatures, then leaped silently onto his lap, settling into the space between him and the open book with the confidence of someone who belonged exactly where they were. The cat's purr joined the evening's symphony, a small engine of contentment that vibrated against his chest, stroking the cat's soft fur. Elias felt the last of his tension dissolve completely. The warm body in his lap, the gentle rocking of the ship, the play of light and shadow across the salon walls, all of it combined to create a moment of such perfect peace that he wanted to preserve it forever, to carry it with him long after he left this floating sanctuary. The porthole framed the night like a living painting, its scene constantly shifting as the ship moved with the water's gentle rhythm. Sometimes the moon would disappear behind a wisp of cloud, only to emerge moments later like a shy smile. Sometimes the silver path on the water would break apart completely, scattered into 1,000 dancing lights, then reform as if by magic. Each change was subtle, unhurried, part of the natural ebb and flow of a world at peace with itself. In this space, between waking and sleeping, between thought and dream, Elias found something he had been seeking, without knowing he was looking for it. Not inspiration, exactly, though he sensed that would come. Not answers to the questions that had been troubling him, though those too seemed less urgent now. What he found was simpler and more profound, the reminder that peace existed, that stillness was possible, that sometimes the most important thing a person could do was simply be present with the beauty of the world. The cat's purr had become a lullaby, its vibrations seeming to synchronize with the gentle motion of the ship, with the rhythm of his own breathing, with the eternal pulse of water against wood. His eyelids grew heavy, but not with the exhaustion that had driven him here. This was the sweet heaviness that comes when the body finally remembers what it means to be truly at rest. Through half-closed eyes, he watched the lantern light dance across the ceiling, creating patterns that shifted and flowed like living things. The shadows seemed friendly now, not the harsh angles of artificial light, but soft, organic shapes that breathed with the room itself. Everything was connected, the light and shadow, the sound of water and wind, the warmth of the cat and the coolness of the night air, all part of one gentle, breathing whole. The brass clocks ticking had become almost subliminal now, less a marking of time than a heartbeat, the steady pulse of this floating world that had welcomed him so completely. Tick, tick, tick. Not the frantic racing of a watch face, but the patient measure of centuries. The reminder that some things endure, some rhythms continue, no matter how fast the world might spin beyond these walls. Somewhere in the distance, a bell buoy chimed softly, not an alarm or warning, but a gentle greeting from one night traveler to another. The sound drifted across the water like a blessing, a reminder that even in the vast darkness of the ocean, there were lights and sounds and guideposts for those who needed them. The bell's tone lingered in the air long after the sound itself had faded, becoming part of the night's gentle music. The moon had climbed higher now, its light streaming more directly through the porthole, illuminating the open book in his lap with silver radiance. The pages seemed to glow with their own inner light, as if the words themselves were made of starlight. He didn't need to read them. Their presence was enough. The knowledge that stories existed, that tomorrow there would be blank pages waiting to be filled, that words would come when they were ready. The cat stretched luxuriously, its paws extending toward the moonlight as if reaching for the silver path on the water. Then it settled again, even deeper into the warmth of his lap, its purr becoming softer, more like a whisper than a sound. Even the ship's cat understood the rhythm of this place, the way night moved here like a slow river, carrying everything gently toward rest. Elias let his head rest against the back of the chair, his neck releasing the last of its tension. The leather was soft against his skin, worn smooth by countless other evening reveries. Through the porthole, he could see the water stretching away toward infinity, its surface now so calm it barely seemed to move. Occasionally, a gentle swell would lift the ship just slightly, but even this motion felt more like floating than sailing, as if they were suspended in some liquid starlight. The night air had grown even softer, carrying scents that seemed to come from dreams rather than any earthly source, the phantom perfume of gardens that existed only in memory, the whisper of rain that had yet to fall, the green sweetness of morning dew hours before dawn. Each breath brought new layers of fragrance, subtle and ever-changing, as if the night itself were a flower slowly opening its petals. In the galley, the copper pots had stopped their gentle swaying, now hanging perfectly still, like sleeping bells. The whole ship seemed to have settled into the deepest part of night, where time moves like honey and dreams begin to blur the edges of waking thought. Even the brass clock seemed to tick more softly now, its voice becoming part of the general whisper of a world preparing for sleep. The book's pages rustled softly in the breeze from the porthole, the sound like leaves murmuring secrets to the wind. But Elias no longer felt the need to read, to seek meaning in words arranged on paper. The meaning was here, in this moment, in the weight of the cat on his lap and the silver path on the water, in the gentle rocking that seemed to sync with his heartbeat, in the profound sense that all was well, that morning would come when it was ready, and that, for now, there was nothing to do but rest. The lantern flame flickered lower now, its light growing softer and more golden, like the last glow of sunset stretched into eternity. The shadows it cast were deep and welcoming, not hiding places for worry, but soft corners where peace could settle like falling snow. Everything was bathed in this golden twilight, the worn leather of the chair, the brass fittings of the ship, the cat's silver fur, the open pages of the book, all of it touched with the gentle light of perfect contentment. Through the porthole, the stars seemed to pulse with their own gentle rhythm, not the harsh twinkling of city-viewed constellations, but the soft breathing of lights that had watched over countless peaceful nights. They reflected in the water below, creating the illusion that the ship floated not on the Mediterranean, but in space itself, cradled by the universe in its most gentle mood. The cat's breathing had synchronized with his own now, both of them riding the gentle waves of air in and out, like swimmers floating in the warmest, safest water imaginable. The purring had become almost subliminal. A vibration felt more than heard. The very frequency of contentment made manifest. Elias felt his consciousness beginning to blur at the edges, not with confusion, but with the soft dissolving that comes when peace is so complete that the boundaries between self and world become unnecessary. He was the chair, and the cat, and the moonlight streaming through the porthole. He was the gentle motion of the ship, and the whisper of wind through rigging. He was the silver path on the water, and the stars reflected in its surface. The night was no longer something happening around him. He had become part of it, woven into its gentle fabric, as naturally as moonlight becomes part of water. His breathing had slowed to match the rhythm of the waves. His heartbeat had found the tempo of the brass clocks, ticking. His thoughts had dissolved into the soft dance of lantern light across the ceiling. Somewhere in the distance, the bell buoy chimed again, its voice carrying across the water like a lullaby sung by the sea itself. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, part of the general music of a world at peace. Each note hung in the air like a visible thing, silver and weightless, before dissolving into the gentle symphony of wind and water. The open book in his lap had become a doorway now, its pages no longer holding words but possibilities, dreams waiting to be dreamed, stories that would tell themselves when the time was right. The moonlight played across the paper like water, and for a moment he could almost see the words forming in the silver light. Not words he needed to write, but words that were already there, had always been there, waiting patiently for him to remember how to see them. The cat shifted slightly, its paw reaching out to touch the edge of the moonlit page, as if it too could see the words forming in the light. Its green eyes reflected the moon like small seas, and in their depths, Elias glimpsed something vast and peaceful. The knowledge that all stories were one story, all dreams part of one great dreaming, all peaceful moments connected across time and space like stars in a constellation of contentment. The ship rocked with barely perceptible motion now, less like movement through water than like breathing. The slow rise and fall of a chest in the deepest sleep. The brass fittings caught and threw back the lantern light in soft gleams, and the wooden walls seemed to glow with their own inner warmth, as if the ship itself were made not of timber and metal, but of crystallized moonlight and concentrated peace. Through the porthole, the horizon had disappeared completely, leaving only the gentle meeting of star-scattered water and star-scattered sky. The moon's reflection had spread across the entire visible surface of the sea, turning the water into liquid silver, and the ship seemed to float not on waves, but on light itself, supported by the gentle luminescence of a world made of dreams. The night had reached its deepest point now, where time stops its forward motion and simply exists, where every breath could last forever, and forever could be contained in a single moment. The cat's purr had become the heartbeat of the night itself. The brass clock's ticking had become the pulse of stars, and the gentle lapping of water against the hull had become the universe's own lullaby. Elias felt himself dissolving into this perfect moment, becoming part of the ship and the sea and the starlight, part of the great peaceful breathing of a world at rest. His last conscious thought was not a thought at all, but a feeling, the profound sense that he was exactly where he belonged, that this moment had been waiting for him all his life, that somewhere in the silver light dancing across the pages of the open book, his words were already written, patient and eternal as the sea itself. The lantern flame flickered one last time, then settled into the steady glow of deep night. The cat's purr became the whisper of wind through sails. The moonlight streamed through the porthole like liquid dreams, and La Lumière continued its gentle rocking, carrying its peaceful cargo through the star-scattered darkness toward morning, toward rest, toward the endless possibility of dreams that taste of salt, air, and moonlight. In this floating sanctuary between wake and sleep, between sea and sky, between the words that were and the words yet to come, all was well, all was peaceful, all was exactly as it should be, rocking gently on the breathing sea, under the patient stars, in the endless, tender embrace of night. The hours passed like gentle dreams, unmarked by the urgency that governed the waking world. Sometimes Elias would drift into the lightest of sleeps, only to wake moments or perhaps hours later to find the scene unchanged, the cat still purring in his lap, the moonlight still streaming through the porthole, the ship still rocking with that eternal, soothing rhythm. Each awakening felt like emerging from one dream into another, equally peaceful, equally real. In one of these gentle transitions between sleep and waking, he found himself aware of new sounds joining the night's symphony. From somewhere deep within the ship came the soft settling of old wood, the whispered conversations that timbers have with time. These weren't the sharp cracks of wood under stress, but the gentle sighs of materials that had learned to work in harmony with the sea, to bend rather than break, to embrace rather than resist. The lantern beside him had burned lower now, its flame smaller, but no less warm. The light it cast had grown more intimate, creating a cocoon of golden illumination that seemed to pulse with his own breathing. Beyond this circle of warmth, the salon had filled with the deepest blue shadows, not dark or threatening, but soft as velvet, gentle as twilight. These shadows seemed alive with peace, moving slowly like sleepy cats, curling around the furniture and walls with languid grace. Through the porthole, he watched clouds drift across the moon like slow thoughts across a peaceful mind. When the moon disappeared behind these gentle veils, the world didn't grow dark, but simply changed, becoming silvered and mysterious, full of subtle variations in light and shadow that the eye could barely detect, but the soul could feel completely. When the moon emerged again, it seemed renewed, as if it too had been resting in the soft embrace of the clouds. The cat had shifted in his sleep, one paw now resting on the open book, as if even in dreams it was reading the stories written in moonlight on the pages. Its breathing had become so synchronized with the ship's gentle motion that cat and vessel seemed to be one creature, one peaceful entity riding the swells of the Mediterranean night. The purr had evolved too, becoming softer, deeper, less a sound than a vibration that seemed to emanate from the ship itself. Elias became aware of his own hand resting on the cat's back, feeling the rise and fall of each breath, the steady pulse of a heart at perfect rest. through this simple contact, he felt connected not just to this one small creature, but to all living things that had ever found peace in the darkness, all souls that had ever been soothed by the gentle rocking of water, all hearts that had ever slowed their racing to match the eternal rhythms of sea and sky. The taste of the chamomile tea lingered faintly on his tongue, mixing with the salt air to create a flavor that was both familiar and mysterious, like a half-remembered dream of comfort. His lips felt soft from the warm ceramic of the mug. His throat relaxed from the gentle heat that had spread through his chest and into his limbs. Even his fingertips, where they rested on the cat's fur, seemed to tingle with a pleasant warmth that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the simple joy of peaceful contact. From the galley came a new sound, the gentle clink of copper against copper as the pots swayed with the ship's motion. But this wasn't the harsh clatter of metal against metal. Instead, it was musical, like distant wind chimes made of burnished gold. Each soft collision created a note that hung in the air for a moment before dissolving into the general music of the night, adding its voice to the lullaby that the ship sang to itself and all who sailed upon it. The brass clock continued its patient marking of time, but Elias had stopped counting the ticks, stopped trying to measure the passage of moments. Time had become fluid here, stretching and pooling like honey in sunlight. Minutes could contain hours of peace, while hours passed like single breaths. The clock's voice had become simply another thread in the fabric of the night, no more urgent than the whisper of waves or the soft sigh of wind through rigging. As he sat in this perfect stillness, Elias became aware of his own body in a new way, not as something that carried tension and worry, but as a vessel for peace, a container for the gentle rhythms of the night. His heartbeat had slowed to match the lapping of water against the hull. His breathing had found the tempo of the wind through the rigging. Even his thoughts had begun to move with the liquid grace of moonlight on water, flowing from one peaceful observation to another without effort or strain. The book in his lap had become something more than paper and ink. In the dancing light of the lantern and the steady glow of the moon, the pages seemed to breathe, to pulse with their own inner life. Words appeared and disappeared in the shifting shadows, not words he needed to read, but words that read themselves to him, stories that told themselves in the language of light and darkness, of motion and stillness, of the eternal conversation between sea and sky. He could see now that the pages were not blank, had never been blank. They were filled with the story that was happening right now. The story of a man finding peace on a floating island of calm. The story of a ship that knew how to rock its passengers into the deepest rest. The story of a night that stretched like a cow in sunlight, lazy and eternal and perfectly content. Every gentle sway of the ship wrote another line. Every shift of moonlight through the porthole added another paragraph to this endless tale of peace. The cat stirred slightly, stretching one paw toward the porthole as if trying to touch the silver path that the moon drew across the water. In its movement, Elias felt the stirring of his own creativity, not the frantic urgency that had driven him to this floating sanctuary, but something gentler, more patient, more aligned with the natural rhythms of inspiration. Ideas began to drift through his consciousness like clouds across the moon, soft and shapeless, but full of potential. He understood now that the words he had been seeking were not hiding from him, but simply waiting for him to become still enough to hear them. They had always been there, floating in the space between his heartbeats, whispering in the pause between one breath and the next, writing themselves in the silver wake that the ship left in the water. All he had needed to do was stop chasing them and allow them to come to him, the way sleep comes to those who stop trying to force it. The night air through the porthole had grown even softer, carrying with it the faint scent of wild rosemary from some distant shore, mixed with the clean smell of deep water and the subtle perfume of sea flowers that bloomed only in darkness. Each breath brought new layers of fragrance, as if the night itself were a garden slowly revealing its secrets to those patient enough to pay attention. In the galley, the copper pots had settled into a new rhythm, their gentle music changing key as the ship found an even deeper peace. The sound was like rain on leaves now, or like the distant murmur of a stream flowing over smooth stones. It spoke of journeys that had no destination except the journey itself, of movement that was really a form of rest, of progress measured not in miles, but in the gradual deepening of peace. The lantern flame had stabilized now into a perfect teardrop of light, motionless and eternal, as if it had always burned and would always burn in this exact way. Its glow seemed to come not from oil and wick, but from some internal source of warmth, some concentrated essence of all the peaceful evenings that had ever been. The light it cast was no longer illumination, but presence, the visible form of safety and comfort and home. Through the porthole, Elias watched a shooting star trace a brief silver line across the darkness before dissolving into the general starlight. The meteor's passage was so quick and so gentle that he might have imagined it, but its brief beauty seemed to contain all the wonder of the night, condensed into a single moment of perfect brightness. Even after it was gone, he could still see its path in his memory, like a blessing written across the sky in silver ink. The cat had begun to dream, its paws twitching slightly as it chased some phantom mouse through fields of starlight. Its whiskers quivered with dream scents. Its ears flicked at dream sounds that only it could hear, watching this small creature lost in peaceful sleep. Elias felt a profound tenderness, not just for this particular cat, but for all sleeping things, all dreams, all the gentle unconsciousness that healed the world each night while the conscious mind rested. The ship's motion had become so subtle now that it felt less like floating on water than like being cradled in the gentle breathing of some vast, benevolent presence. Each tiny rise and fall was perfectly timed, perfectly gentle, as if the sea itself had learned the exact rhythm needed to lull its passengers into the deepest peace. The Mediterranean had become a mother's arms, rocking her children into dreams that tasted of salt and starlight. From somewhere far above came a new sound, the soft whisper of wind through the furled sails, though the sails themselves hung still and quiet in the breathless night. It was as if the ship remembered the wind even when there was no wind, as if its canvas held the memory of all the breezes that had ever filled it, all the journeys that had ever carried it across these ancient waters. The sound was like breathing, like sighing, like the contentment that comes when a wanderer finally finds home. The brass fittings throughout the salon had taken on a life of their own in the mingled moonlight and lantern glow, winking and gleaming like captured stars. A compass on the wall caught the light and threw it back in gentle flashes, its needle pointing steadily toward magnetic north, but seeming to suggest that the only true direction was inward, toward the quiet center where peace lived like a small, steady flame. The book's pages rustled softly in the gentle breeze from the porthole, the sound like whispered conversations between old friends. But the words on the pages seemed less important now than the spaces between them, the margins where moonlight pooled like liquid silver, the quiet places where meaning lived, not in language, but in the simple presence of possibility. Every page was a doorway, every line a path leading deeper into the peaceful country of the night. Elias felt his eyelids growing heavy again. But this was not the exhaustion that had driven him to seek this floating refuge. This was the sweet heaviness that comes when the body finally remembers what it means to be truly at rest. When every muscle and nerve and cell releases its grip on wakefulness and allows itself to drift into the deeper currents of peace. His head settled more comfortably against the soft leather of the chair, his neck releasing the last threads of tension it had been holding. The cat's purr had become almost subliminal now, felt more than heard, a vibration that seemed to come from the ship itself, from the water beneath, from the starlight above. It was the frequency of contentment made audible, the sound that peace makes when it settles into a place and decides to stay. Through the warm body in his lap, Elias felt connected to this cosmic purring, this universal hum of satisfaction that ran through everything when the world was exactly as it should be. Through half-closed eyes, he watched the interplay of light and shadow across the salon's ceiling, patterns that formed and dissolved and reformed like living things. The shadows were not empty spaces, but full of gentle presence, populated with the ghosts of other peaceful evenings, other souls who had found rest in this floating sanctuary. He felt their company now, not as intrusion, but as blessing, the accumulated peace of all who had ever sought refuge in the rocking embrace of the sea. The night had reached its deepest point now, that magical hour when time seems to pause and gather itself, when the darkness is so complete and gentle that it feels like being held inside a warm, black pearl. The moon had reached its zenith, its light streaming down through the porthole like a waterfall of liquid silver, pooling on the pages of the open book and flowing across the floor like spilled dreams. In this deepest darkness, Elias felt himself expanding, his consciousness growing soft and large and peaceful, encompassing not just his own body, but the cat, the chair, the ship, the sea itself. He was the moonlight streaming through the porthole and the gentle lapping of waves against the hull. He was the brass clock marking moments that had no beginning or end, and the copper pots singing their quiet songs in the galley. He was the shooting star that had traced its brief path across the sky, and the countless other stars that watched over this peaceful scene with their ancient, patient light. The boundaries between self and world had dissolved completely now, not through any effort or striving, but through the simple act of becoming still enough, peaceful enough, to remember that there had never been any boundaries at all. There was only this unbound, breathing presence, of which everything was part: the man and the cat, and the ship, and the sea, and the stars. All one entity, rocking gently in the cradle of the night. The cat's breathing had become his breathing. The ship's motion had become his heartbeat. The sea's whispering had become his thoughts. He was no longer a passenger on this vessel, but part of the vessel itself, part of the ancient conversation between wind and water, between starlight and shadow, between the seeking soul and the peace it had always carried within itself. And in this complete dissolution into peace, in this perfect merging with the gentle rhythms of the night, Elias found what he had been seeking, without knowing he was seeking it. Not inspiration for his writing, though that would come. Not answers to the questions that had troubled him, though those would reveal themselves in time. What he found was simpler and more profound than anything he could have imagined. The knowledge that peace was not something to be achieved or earned or discovered, but something to be remembered, something that had always been there, waiting patiently for him to become still enough to recognize it. The lantern flame flickered one last time, then settled into its eternal burning. The cat purred its cosmic lullaby. The ship rocked in perfect rhythm with the breathing of the sea. And somewhere in the silver light that danced across the pages of the open book, in the space between waking and sleeping, between thought and dream, between the words that were and the words yet to be born. All was well, all was peaceful, all was exactly as it had always been, and would always be, in the endless, tender embrace of the night that rocks all souls to rest in the gentle arms of eternity.